Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today for the webinar, Nuclear Orderbooks 101, Scale to Save. My name is Jeremy Tarr, and I'm the U.S. State Policy Director here at Clean Air Task Force. CATF is a nonprofit organization working globally to catalyze the rapid development and deployment of clean energy. We bring 30 years of policy and technical expertise and operate as a pragmatic advocacy group with a presence across the U.S. and internationally. CATF state advocacy leverages that deep technical and policy expertise that CATF is known for, and we provide timely, fact-based education, analysis, and insights to advance climate and clean energy solutions across the country. This is the third of our 2026 state policy webinar series. In case you missed it, last month, CATF and Acadia Center presented on public financing of transmission. And in February, CATF, NRDC, the Conservative Energy Network, and Rewiring America presented our 2026 outlooks for state policy. Other previous webinars have covered topics such as 2025 winds and trends, low emission industrial policy, fusion energy, and clean electricity standards. We decided to choose nuclear order books as today's topic because of the renewed interest in nuclear energy across the country, from states, the federal government, utilities, supply chain companies, and we're seeing some NGOs reevaluate their positions on nuclear. This nascent nuclear renaissance is emerging for a number of reasons. The need for increased generation to meet load, the need for reliable and zero emission energy to avoid air pollution and mitigate climate change, the huge economic opportunities from construction, supply chain development and operations, energy independence, and others. There are many facets to nuclear energy, but the concept of nuclear order books is getting increased attention. So today we have an August panel of experts to unpack what order books are, their benefits, the anatomy of an order book, and current order book efforts in states. I'm thrilled to be joined today by Steve Camello, Executive Director of the Nuclear Scaling Initiative, my colleague Victor Ibarra, Senior Manager for Nuclear Energy at Clean Air Task Force, and Sandy Fazeli, Senior Managing Director at NASIO, the National Association of State Energy Officials. I'll pass it to Victor in just a minute, but before we get started, a few housekeeping items. The webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our website with our prior webinars and emailed to you afterwards. We'll also email you today's slides. We welcome audience questions, and we'll have a Q&A portion at the end after the presentations by Steve and Sandy and Victor. If you have a question, go ahead and submit it using the Q&A function at any time during the presentation. With that, Victor, over to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jeremy. And thank you everyone for being here today. As Jeremy said, my name is Victor Barr Jr., and I'm a senior manager for the Advanced Nuclear Energy Program at CATF. But I'm actually also part of the Nuclear Scaling Initiative, which, if you're not familiar with NSI, it is a collaboration slash project between three different entities: the Clean Air Task Force, the Energy Futures Initiative Foundation, and also the Nuclear Threat Initiative, where our mission is to effectively, efficiently, predictably, and safely scale nuclear energy globally at a gigawatt scale over the next decades. So this is super exciting work and very relevant to what we're going to be talking about today. So to begin with, I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about the basic theory of knowledge associated with order books, why they matter, and also provide a series of examples of where we've seen order books be effective globally and what we're trying to apply here in the United States, which will be complementary to what Steve and Sandy will be talking about in their presentation. So next slide, please. So what is an order book? It's actually pretty simple. It's just a queue of orders for a product that is standardized and similar. It's how airlines buy airplanes and how we also shop at places like Costco. You pick a product and you just commit to buying a lot of them. For nuclear, this means picking a nuclear reactor design, whether it's a large reactor, the small modular reactor, or even a microreactor, and making a firm commitment to build multiple units of the same design sequentially to capture opportunities like lessons learned, standardization, and cost predictability across a nuclear project lifecycle. This is extremely important because repetition is the whole point in terms of trying to accumulate the experience necessary to move forward with predictable nuclear orders within the United States, but also globally. Next slide, please. This is very, very important because when you compare nuclear deployment from a coordinated and uncoordinated approach, it's important to contextualize where we are right now within the nuclear industry, especially within the United States. Typically, we've seen in the United States a history of one-off bespoke projects where uncoordinated nuclear development can leave investors with elevated financial risk, and technology heterogeneity means that there's fragmented experience or fragmented opportunities in terms of learning experiences. Associated with this as well is fragmented opportunity for the supply chain development and labor development necessary. So this is why here, as part of the Nuclear Scaling Initiative project across the three organizations, we're trying to create the necessary durable demand signals to move forward with coordinated nuclear deployment, which does a variety of things, including reducing exposure to any single party or project, and understanding that technology homogeneity can lead to improved learning rates across a wide spectrum, including cost predictability, but also schedule predictability. And we'll talk a little bit about that later in the presentation. This is extremely important because it can lead to mature ecosystems and mature supply chain and labor development. Next slide, please. So what does this actually look like from accumulating experience across first of a kind and nth of a kind reactors? The graphic here showcases a reactor project normalized or indexed at about a 100% scale. But what you want to see here is that through lessons learned either through the design process, the regulatory application process, the supply chain procurement process, but also the construction process at building the nuclear reactor at a bespoke site, there's the opportunity to get first of a kind cost down to nth of a cost that we see to be or perceive to be the opportunity to go as low as 40%, which is extremely, extremely important in terms of trying to quantify what could be a opportunity to standardize nuclear reactors moving forward. Next slide, please. Understanding what this opportunity looks like of lessons learned in terms of cost predictability and schedule predictability from first of a kind to nth of a kind reactors. This is where we see the opportunity for large order books really being able to lower average unit costs and help remove first mover disadvantage. So the figure that we have here on the screen is academic in standpoint, but it lists out the opportunity of how having an order book of different sizes, whether it's an order book of 2, 4, 6, or even 10 units, can really help in terms of lowering average unit costs. This is extremely important because over 10 units, we see that 40% reduction that we've been talking about and can help create the conditions necessary to start sharing ideas like where to appropriately share risk amongst a wide suite of stakeholders from the start. Next slide, please. As we continue moving forward with the idea of what an order book is, it's also important to understand why this is so important in the context of the opportunity for bankability and also the opportunity for trying to move forward with the appropriate risk in terms of involving the appropriate entities to move forward with durable demand for a nuclear reactor and multiple nuclear reactor projects within the United States. Now, paired with the right financial tools that we've seen a lot of activity and movement in within the past few administrations, whether it's been Trump 1.0, Biden, or Trump 2.0, we've seen different types of financial tools like the investment tax credits, production tax credits, loan guarantee programs. But the reality is that when we want to move forward with nuclear reactor projects, we have to think about how to quantify risk and also how to mitigate that risk moving forward from a wide suite of angles, including the project execution risk in terms of trying to move forward with the opportunities to apply lessons learned for construction at multiple sites, understanding what the supply chain gaps look like, and also the potential workflow shortages, and understanding what is the opportunity to um, attract the appropriate investment for moving forward with early builds. And this is all stuff that different entities care about, whether it's the original equipment manufacturers, the engineering, procurement, and construction companies, or the capital debt providers. They all play a different role in ensuring that the appropriate mechanisms can be put in place in order to move forward with a order book of new nuclear reactors. And it will take a whole system approach to work together to ensure that the appropriate conversations are had to move forward with the appropriate demand attributes. Next slide, please. Understanding that this demand aggregation and risk sharing can really help create the conditions necessary to not just stay in the mindset that we've had in the United States of single bespoken projects and trying to move forward beyond just a single deployment. Really, the reality is that what brings us to durable demand is worth being specific about. So other factors are going to be affecting how new nuclear development takes place in the United States, and also how order book development takes place in the United States, is understanding where these projects are going to be located, understanding that there's the opportunity for either owner operators that have previous experience with nuclear development to move forward with new nuclear projects since they have familiar experience, but also understanding what are the market conditions necessary in terms of trying to provide any type of price certainty for new nuclear projects, understanding that revenue is extremely important for someone trying to move forward with owning or operating a asset like this, and understanding what is the duration for these type of contracts that could be moved forward with other players, like a hyperscaler, if they're interested in procuring any type of generation from a nuclear asset. All that being said, can you please click on the next slide? There are evidence, or there is evidence of nuclear order books working in practice. You know, we don't have to speculate a lot about the data, but in terms of understanding where different nuclear reactor projects lie within the US context, in the global market context as well, is that the Vogtle projects went very poorly in the United States, but other countries have shown that there's opportunity to lower costs with new nuclear energy projects, with the opportunity at hand of building sequential standardized builds. Have seen that in places like South Korea, Russia, China, and France, as seen by the graph on the left. And then if you click the next slide, Natalie, there's also evidence at at the Baraka units 1 through 4, where the capex was documented of dropping substantially from units 1 through 4 at exactly the same sites because they committed to building a standardized reactor design at the same location where they took advantage of the lessons learned all the way from unit 1 through unit 4. Next slide, please. Excuse me. Thank you. And also the evidence is associated with order books being able to provide schedule compressions, albeit that the Vogtle reactor projects in the United States went very, very poorly. But there is evidence as well that the Vogtle units 3 and 4 did have the opportunity to have schedule compression, which is extremely good to know, understanding that from units 3 to 4, there were schedule compressions of ranging up to 50%, which is extremely exciting to see for the development of new nuclear energy projects. So understanding that durable demand, experience accumulation, and shared risk are measurable and work in different countries, it's very apparent that we need to provide this opportunity and create the conditions for this to exist within the United States as well as we move forward with new nuclear energy development. And that's why here at NSI, we think that the order book mechanism can satisfy this and is why it's our main argument moving forward with development here in the US. And I think that should be it in terms of my slide. So now I'll pass it off to my colleague, Steve Camello, who can talk a little bit more about the anatomy of an order book.
Victor, thanks. I think that was a great foundation for what an order book is, and the next three slides I'll take you through who are the players and how might they be interconnected and bring in order book from theory to execution. So next slide, please. So to get an order book off the ground, it really does take an entire ecosystem. And the way to think about this is the federal, state, and commercial stakeholders all need to show up and be party to a deal that they all recognize that their individual equities and their constraints are recognized and addressed. And so this is what we call an interconnected triangle of stakeholders around a preferred investment approach. And I don't think it's necessarily enough to just keep it at a high level, commercial, federal, and state level. Who are these entities? Well, at the commercial level, there's actually quite a few. There's the developer, and that is the entity that is actually going to go and arrange all the contracts and bring to bear all the various parties to come to one specific deal. The EPC, or the engineering, procurement, and construction entity, um, they're the ones who are going to engineer. They're going to procure all the large uh, um, uh, the large item within the supply chain, and they're actually going to go and build. OEM, the original equipment manufacturer or slash technology vendor, that is simplistically the one who's going to provide the nuclear design. Customers and off-takers, ultimately, the entire project rests on their willingness to pay. And Victor brought this up quite specifically, the tenor of their commitment. So how long they're going to be buying offtake from an operating reactor, what is their price? And then when would this entity or this reactor come online? All of those basically have to come together because that's essentially all the money that's going to pay backwards from operation back to construction, back to development, which I'll get into the next slide. Um, that's essentially all the revenue that's used to pay off all the debt and equity providers. Speaking of debt and equity providers, the capital providers, who is going to, or what are the entities that are going to put in the various forms of capital and at what time and in what sequence and in what risk reward preference that they have. The owner, the operator, usually this is a utility who would, once a project is complete, a utility would take over as the owner and operate it for the duration of its operational life. And we can never forget about labor or the workforce, both in terms of construction and craft labor and in operation. At the federal level, it is more than just saying the government. The White House, the various agencies, including DOE, Commerce and Treasury, Congress, the National Energy Dominance Council, they all have a role in providing consistent political leadership and creating the policy conditions that are supportive of nuclear over the long term. Let's also not forget that they have incredible convening power, which can help bring multiple parties around the table so that we can get to yes on one single idea or one deal. And at the state level, multiple entities again, the governor's office, the state legislature, the state energy office, the state economic development office, and clearly the public utility or the public service commission, they all have their equities and they have a tremendous influence on where um, reactors are built, under what conditions, and then, quite frankly, what are some of the economic elements or dimensions that are allowed or disallowed through the construction and the operation of that reactor. Next slide. So here, basically, what we're getting at is you have multiple development stages to actually bring an order book or any reactor from conception to actually operation. And here, what the main takeaway that I'd like you to walk away with is the intersection of development stages, the risks, the primary risks that are faced within those development stages, and then who are the market participants that are tied to both the development stage and the risks that are faced. So simplistically, we have three development stages. We have development, which is taking an idea, a concept, selecting a technology, bringing the capital providers online, signing up the offtake, bringing everything to an FID position or final investment decision. That takes a tremendous amount of work, and that usually takes, anywhere from 1 to 2 years. It could take a little bit longer at the beginning of an order book, once simply because the team needs to gel a little bit. Number one, and number two, you have just a lot of initial contracts to get structured and developed. And then as you move forward, then you have a little bit more of a template. Construction of any reactor can take anywhere from 5 to 9 years. 9 years is a good estimate in the beginning. If you're thinking about the first or the second build within an order book, hopefully with respect to accumulated learning and other efficiencies that come along the line, you have schedule compression and cost savings that would show up in the overall construction duration coming down. And of course, operation 40 years plus. In some cases, there can be an expectation that you're going to be operating upwards of 80 years. So when we think about building new nuclear, two dominant risks seem to bind, and setting aside brand new technologies that have commercialization risk, thinking about those technologies that have already been proven in the market, the risks usually rest within project execution and revenue. We know that the technology works. The risk remains that it's not necessarily a foregone conclusion that we can build them on time and on budget. And so those project execution risks are driven by weak project management structures, thin construction experience, macroeconomic supply chain bottlenecks, which we saw within Vogtle, and workforce pipeline challenges. These are all the risks right now that we see in the marketplace that are holding up the majority of deal formation. There's a lot of capital that's available, both public and private, but these risks that I'm speaking about within project execution, those remain still to be completely solved. And then you have revenue risk, and that is driven by ratepayer exposure and willingness to pay from commercial and industrial customers. Nuclear does need to compete with other forms of electricity generation. There is also limitations from the Public Service Commission on tariff structures that would either make or break the economics of a new build. So having enough revenue over a long enough duration to pay back capital and pay back return on capital, whether that's debt or equity, that is a major risk. So these two risks are essentially that need to be addressed somehow through some sort of mechanism, and that is needed for any one reactor, and it's definitely needed for an order book of them. And the market participants here, you get to you have a sense for which risks bear on which participants and at what development stage. So during the development construction, it's primarily the remit of the technology vendor and the EPCs and the developer or the development company, the supply chain, and equity and non-equity sponsors. In the revenue risk category, it becomes much more of a utility owner operator dominated risk exposure, O&M services, and the customers themselves. Are they willing to put up the revenue necessary to make the entire economics work? Lenders exist throughout, and the workforce exists throughout as well. Whether that workforce obviously changes depending on what development stage you're in, but it is a binding constraint through all stages of nuclear development, construction, and operation. Next slide, please. So this is my last slide, and here what I want to sketch for you is an investment structure that leverages internal and external risk mitigation approaches um, to help take some of those risks that hold up new nuclear construction, that hold up order book formation. How might we address those? And you basically address them through two dominant approaches. What one we call internal, and one we call external. So with internal approaches, these are basically project management 101. You have a base cost estimate, and if you look on the left-hand side there, row A, you would want a project buffer in there, a base budget with some contingencies. That's just good project management, so that if any costs start to creep up, you're able to cover those within a known range. And the key stakeholders that would contribute or be exposed to that mechanism would be the developer, the OEM, EPC, and the owner. Another way to mitigate or cushion against cost overruns or cost risks is the formation or the structure of the construction contracts. You can isolate and you can mitigate risk cost exposure through fixed price contracts. Now, the industry, especially in the US, is not there yet to have a fully fixed price contract. Nuclear is not necessarily like other complex industrial construction, simply because we haven't accumulated the learning to feel confident that we can do that. But there are partially fixed price contracts or majority fixed price contracts that really help contain what the cost escalation that could happen in the first couple of builds within an order book. And that's primarily the remit of the EPC, OEM, and suppliers. And then you have risk sharing, absorbing losses through margin erosion. That's row C. And what does that actually mean? Well, it's best explained by what's happening up in Canada. In Canada, you see that the GE Hitachi BWX 300 is being built by a consortium of EPC, OEM, and utility in Ontario. And they're using something called an integrated project delivery model. And essentially, what that is a contracting, a relational structure that if costs start to escalate, if schedules start to slip, then margins that would otherwise be paid, those start to they start to erode, and they erode in a way that starts to tie all the entities together. That if there's an issue that's being caused by one entity, it affects all other entities and the margin that they're able to obtain. So it creates the incentive for everyone to help each other and to minimize that margin erosion. So it really is a powerful contracting methodology that aligns incentives. So that's all basically project management 101, essentially that you would put these in place to contain cost overruns, which are, the one of the dominant risks with project execution within new nuclear builds. External approaches are additional risk sharing mechanisms. And here, these are, they can be broken down into, we call it private sector only and then blended. And I'll get to each. So within private sector, we're talking about just like what was used with Vogel, if there was cost an overrun, then you can have like EDF offer an additional loan to provide liquidity to finish off the project. You can have equity at risk. You can have multiple private equity or sovereign wealth funds who are willing to put capital to cover what would otherwise be an extraordinarily rare but still on the books risk exposure. They would obviously want compensation for making that capital available, but that capital would be available to cover those kinds of overruns. And then you have something perhaps like a sliding PPA if you have a particularly motivated customer who would be willing to increase their base PPA price to uh, catch up to the revenue required to essentially make the entire economics of that reactor work by, say, moving from, say, $100 a megawatt hour over 20 years to maybe 110. That is a private sector approach to absorbing some of these overruns. And then the final one is a blended approach. This is public-private. You may have been you may have been hearing that insurance mechanisms, cost overrun insurance mechanisms, where perhaps the federal government can step in on a limited basis. Maybe if the order book is on the order of 6, maybe for like the first 1 or 2. Again, to get over that first mover disadvantage, give confidence to the public market that we can actually go and deliver. Lessons learned are accumulated, and then those can be plugged into subsequent builds. I just want to briefly touch upon the right panel here. And looking at the scenario with overrun, right? You essentially have the debt, the equity, and you might have a non-equity component. And you have your base budget, your buffer, which you would essentially exhaust if you needed to, and you would start running into an overrun for which the internal and external approaches would start to bind. That's essentially how you contain all the costs. You share the risk appropriately, and you create the conditions for market confidence to build multiple of a kind through an order book construct. So I'll stop there and I'll hand it over.
Thank you, Steve, Jeremy, Victor, for the opportunity to be part of this panel. My name is Sandy Fazeli. I'm with the National Association of State Energy Officials, or NASIO, and I'll be talking a little bit about state approaches and actions. So if you could go to the next slide. Just a few words about NASIO. We are the National Nonprofit Association for the governor-designated energy offices from all of the 56 states and territories. State energy offices play a wide variety of policy planning and program development roles. And so NASIO has a number of different program areas as well as events and convenings to help ensure that the states are talking to one another and learning from one another as well. Next slide, please. And when it comes to nuclear development and advanced nuclear development, we're seeing a number of different roles being undertaken by state energy offices across the country. I do think it's important to note that we're seeing quite a bit of variety. There are a few states that are either explicitly or implicitly constrained from pursuing or exploring advanced nuclear, whether through moratoria or other types of policies that might be constricting their ability to act on this. But other state energy offices are taking a more proactive approach, whether through developing strategic frameworks, advisory groups, stakeholder convenings that help to potentially inform state policy or approaches to advanced nuclear. And yet others on the sort of the other side of the spectrum are really thinking about SMR deployment and development and how their state can be part of the economic opportunity that they see around advanced nuclear. So really depending on the state that you're in, the approach to nuclear might look different. And that's actually one of the reasons why on the next slide, I can talk about the NASIO First Mover Initiative. So NASIO as a national organization sought to bring together several state energy offices to really try to create some peer exchange opportunities, as well as continuity of understanding about state approaches to advanced nuclear. So this is an initiative that's directed by the state energy offices in New York, Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Wyoming, as well as Maryland, Pennsylvania, Utah, Virginia, and West Virginia, with a number of additional observer states, all of whom are committed to accelerating the timeline and seeking to reduce costs for advanced nuclear projects. And through NASIO, they're holding conversations, thinking about strategic collaboration, information sharing, and even potentially formalized or informal partnerships across states and the private sector, which I think Steve and Victor both really emphasized the need for open lines of communication, opportunities for collaboration and coordination with private sector entities as well as utilities. Next slide, please. One of the key initial actions of the first mover states was to release a request for information. This was last fall, soliciting industry and stakeholder input on how states can best coordinate to develop an order book for advanced nuclear projects. And this was really seen as one of the key mechanisms to speed project development and lower costs. We ended up receiving responses from 31 different entities. These included nuclear developers, utilities, private sector organizations that have an interest or a stake in nuclear, as well as potential end users like data centers. The input that we received really emphasized the need for multi-state coordination. I think that's one of the themes of today as well, is that because of the scale and complexity of a nuclear project, it's not just a matter of developing a bespoke, sort of project or development. Any level of coordination, continuity can help reduce per unit costs over time. The responses also highlighted the need for state leadership and flexibility. So one of the roles that we're seeing state energy offices really take on is to be able to bring together stakeholders, connect with local communities, help to elevate local concerns and opportunities to the broader sort of state level conversations that are happening. And unlike public utilities commissions, which may be constrained by dockets and their ability to engage private sector, we're seeing state energy offices really be able to be flexible in how they're participating in these conversations. Risk sharing and mitigation, again, that's kind of the core premise of an order book, is to really think about over time how to be able to share in the risk and the costs so that per unit costs eventually go down. Regulatory coordination and information sharing. This is becoming especially important because of the energy affordability concerns that many governors and state energy offices have, really to be thinking about what are the regulatory structures that can help create guardrails, that can help protect consumers while still taking advantage of, if there is one, an opportunity for nuclear energy development and economic development. Demand aggregation. So again, really just making sure that state energy offices are trying to create as much consistent demand as possible for these types of projects. Innovative financing, which Steve alluded to, really looking to federal investors as well as private sector. Workforce and supply chain readiness had come up among our respondents as another sort of challenge. And then a really critical one is waste management and states' role in that. So looking at, what are the both interim and long-term opportunities for waste storage, as well as what are the potential opportunities and risks around the transportation of waste. Next slide, please. I just wanted to also note that another role that state energy offices are playing is around engagement of federal partners, and in particular, the U.S. Department of Energy. Top of mind for many of you all in the audience might be the Nuclear Lifecycle Innovation Campus, RFP. This really sought to identify sites and states that might be ready for hosting the waste and spent fuel of nuclear developments. We saw several state energy office led or supported submissions. I think we saw about 28 states ultimately represented in the submissions that we're aware of. And in the content of those submissions, perhaps unsurprisingly, is quite a bit of variety in terms of the level of policy and financial commitments by states, whether they were able to express a commitment by private capital investors, and then often on a regional or state by state basis, varying interest in, whether it's hosting waste or fuel sites, or being part of the supply chain versus, being a site for building and hosting reactors. And then the final piece that I'll just mention is that the NASIO First Mover Initiative states have also been engaged with DOE in discussions about pre-final investment decision recommendations. So this is really thinking about how state energy offices and other state actors can help be facilitators towards ultimately reaching investment decisions. A few of the recommendations that we've put forth is establishing a federal state interagency effort to really speed adoption of generic and pre-existing siting information, streamlining state and federal permitting and approval processes, exploring opportunities for cost sharing programs or early site permitting, supporting analytical and policy project development needs, and then also supporting US state and international nuclear exchanges to speed development and utilization of US technologies. Next slide, please. Oh, and that's it for me. Really great to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Great. Thanks, Sandy. Victor and Steve, I invite you to come back on camera, and we're going to do about 15, 20 minutes or so of Q&A. As a reminder, if you have not already entered a question into the chat, just go ahead and do that. It'll come straight to the presenters, and then we'll ask it live. And we have some coming in. Let's see. Let's start. We have a couple that are similar. The first two, I think, are on the topic of nuclear and energy affordability. So we know there's significant debate about the core premise and value proposition of nuclear. Basically, is it worth the investment? Is it worth the risk? What would you advise entities, folks that have concerns about risk and the cost of investment? Similar question from a former commissioner pointing out the dynamics in the recent Georgia Utilities Commission race, where a couple of folks lost who had supported Vogtle, and there was a strong theme of affordability in that race, and Vogtle being responsible for a lot of cost increases in the state. And so the question is, with politics where they are now, can regulators really afford to advance nuclear energy given potential overruns? Open to the group. I imagine each of you may have some thoughts on those questions. Yeah, Victor.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy, and thank you for the audience for providing those questions. I think I want to level set and begin by saying, within the United States, no state is a monolith. They're each facing their own political and geographical dynamics associated with how they can think about understanding where their current assets are in terms of generation, transmission, and distribution, and also how they can move forward. Understanding there are different states that may take into account or have passed legislation associated with how they want to roll out either a wide suite of clean energy technologies, whether they are intermittent or firm. And I say that by trying to start to talk about how the value of an asset like clean, firm power, which is nuclear power. Nuclear is clean, firm power, can play a different role in different states that operate under different balancing authorities, right? So I think it's really important to contextualize moving forward how we can discuss from a bulk power system perspective, what is the value of an asset like nuclear or another clean firm technology, where we start to think beyond where we've been in the past, which is typically planning out in shorter time horizons, whether it's 3, 5 years, and thinking about in the long term an asset like a nuclear power generating station, which we are seeing, reach into the 80 years of life cycle operation, what that type of predictability can provide in terms of complementing the wide suite of technologies that have already entered our electricity grid system. So I think it's definitely a very valid question in terms of how we have this conversation about affordability. And I think my response is clean, firm assets like nuclear energy can provide at least different states and authorities the opportunity to at least have the conversations of how they would like to move forward with the affordability question. So it should definitely be considered. But I invite my colleagues, Sandy and Steve, if they have any other thoughts they would like to add. I'm happy to hear that as well.
Yeah, thank you, Victor. I'll just add that I think that some of the concerns about nuclear development are extremely valid. Affordability, risk management, waste hosting, and the potential for incidents. I do think, though, that the cost of not engaging because it is such a polarizing topic, because potentially there just are a lot of anti-nuclear sentiments, are actually higher than trying to engage constructively right now. What we're seeing is, and I think Steve alluded to some of the timelines, in the next 10 years, we may be seeing quite a bit of commercial construction of these developments. The decisions that states, PUCs, the federal government are making today will impact what those projects look like. And so, if you are working, those in the audience, if you're working with groups that may have concerns, it's really valuable to elevate them now, because it's possible that there are policy or technological ways to address them. On affordability, we are seeing, and I think the Vodal project really sort of, the anatomy of it has informed how states are thinking about, how to place guardrails around affordability, ensure that residential customers in particular are not overly affected by the rate impacts. In terms of technology, we're seeing a lot of advancements too, in terms of waste transportation, storage, how spent fuel is dealt with. Also, a lot of these newer reactor types have smaller emergency response footprints, which I think can hopefully create some more confidence among nearby communities that they have the capacity to be able to respond to incidents if they happen. So again, I think now is the time to be sort of elevating those concerns, as opposed to waiting until it's potentially too late and decisions are made.
These are all excellent comments. I'll just add that I understand that Vogel is a very charismatic example. I think it's also worth understanding that it's somewhat of an outlier as well. You had Fukushima that created a real large headwind that evaporated a lot of demand for the same kind of reactors, that took a lot of the economies of scale of the large components off the system. You had COVID. You had a new regulatory regime. You had construction starting with an incomplete design, right? Some of these are project management 101. Some of these are macroeconomic risks. Now, the Vogel 4, I would say, should be taken as as the design to be locked in and moved forward. And so on that premise, work needs to be done to have real, credible cost estimates at specific sites that people can see and really understand what is the envelope of, like, the best case scenario and the worst case scenario. What I find is there's a lot of guesswork, and some of the better estimates that are out there are just not available to the public. And you create the conditions of filling in the blanks with incomplete information. So number one is, what is a credible cost estimate for specific sites with specific technologies? And then looking at the AP1000 as an example. right? Because again, there's no doubt that technology works, number one. Number two is the risk sharing mechanisms there to not expose the utilities that are otherwise not designed to take that kind of risk. There are other actors in the world who are much better positioned, and with the right contracting structures in place, you can unburden the utility to some extent to be able to not take on risk that is not necessarily in their control or they're also not designed for. So, um, so that all that to be said is there's a lot of opportunity in the way that the different parties contract and relate to each other that would really minimize the exposure to ratepayers. I think the last thing is let's go back to the order book idea, right? Um, Thinking about the unit of analysis here as multiple builds instead of one, there are ways to essentially uh, focus on the average cost as opposed to that one cost on that one first on that reactor, especially if there's going to be cost mitigants around it. So the only way to get to nth of a kind is to go through first, second, third of a kind. And it seems like there might be some pretty credible ways to do that.
What these questions expose is there's also like a political reality to folks who commissioners who are voting to approve or not approve these and need to get reelected. And there's, I think, just like a lot of sentiment out there based on the Georgia election. And there's also just real world impact and experiences of ratepayers, and not just in Georgia, but in South Carolina. And we have another question about VC Summer. Can you explain how the incentives mentioned here, I think referring to the order book approach, could have prevented the failure at VC Summer or at least mitigated the economic impact on ratepayers? And let's start with you, Steve. It's similar maybe to one of the last points you made.
At the risk of oversimplifying, I, I think there's something to be said about a completion guarantee. And there's something to be said about who are the entities that can ensure that completion guarantee. Um, I'll speak for myself. I think for the first few builds, that's something that could be transferred to the federal government. Um, but also keeping in mind the moral hazard here. Again, you want to create the conditions where the private sector is shouldering the vast majority of the risk, but that most improbable layer for all the rest of the capital to show up, you need to have some sort of top level protection. Um, and you don't need that for forever. You just need it for the first couple, and then the case would be proven. If something along those lines was available, then I believe that the probability of VC Summer being completed would have been higher than what happened in the past. I don't know if Sandy and Victor want to add or take away from any of that.
Nothing to add. I think you captured it, Steve.
Let's keep going. Questions, I guess, probably to you, Steve. What you presented on the anatomy of an order book and then multiple players and all involved. What are the types of entities that would bring all of these players together? Is there a stakeholder that's in a good position to lead coordination and negotiating a well-structured investment approach, given the diversity of interests involved here?
Well, other than a platform organization like the Nuclear Scaling Initiative, uh, look, who wants it? Who wants it? Who is demanding that they need clean, firm power for the next few decades? Um, I think a coalition that is very interested in those outcomes or creating generation that has those attributes. I think if you assemble an OEM, because you got to choose a technology, and a customer who really wants this or a set of customers, and then a couple of capital providers that are looking beyond just this order book, but are really much motivated as nuclear generation as an investable asset class, both in the US and internationally. I think that is the minimum set that you need, because the customer will tell you where they actually want it built, and that will start drawing in a utility, right? They will also talk about what their willingness to pay is. They will also talk about what are the risk mitigants that they're willing to put into place. The technology actually matters a lot, right? Again, um, you want to start building with what you know, because that will have a tailwind for the entire industry. There are a lot of other technologies that are going to be coming online that are not quite licensable yet, but will be. And then the risk will move from technological to a project execution. Wouldn't it be nice that you had a supply chain and you had a workforce that's able to accommodate those designs and build them? And then I'll just double down on the capital providers. If we think that we're going to come even close to the tripling of nuclear pledge that was issued at COP 28 in 2023, we're talking about a terawatt of new capacity that needs to be built between now and 2050. That's like 60 gigawatts a year. And the last time we built that much globally is never. The high water mark was 1983, and that was 33 gigawatts. We're talking about a 10 to 20 trillion dollar opportunity that the US is nowhere to be seen compared to like Russia and China. There's a lot to be built in the US, but there's an immense amount to be built overseas. And there's a lot of interest in American technology, and American technology becomes very palatable if you can prove that you can build it at home. So just thinking about it from that perspective, there's a lot of motivation to get this right and to build first in the US and then export that and gain an immense amount of market share internationally.
Do you all have a sense of when that we will see a fixed firm price on AP1000s again? And is an order book needed in order to see that, or is there some way we get to that point, without an order book?
I'll start. Look, firm fixed price. You can get a price, right? But you really want to show a trajectory of cost decreases, right? I'm sure I can get you a price for an AP1000 right now that's not palatable, right? In on its own. But if I can go and create the conditions where I'm showing you a cost decrease, right? That cost decrease basically creates a market, and that market is where essentially you're going to get um, uh, a buyer's club or sets of buyers that become interested over time. So I also think that an order book means that you're making the problem big enough for it to be in the national interest. If we build one, it's really hard to motivate like any type of public sector involvement. But if we're talking about powering AI and we want to compete against, international competitors and so forth, we're going to need all the electrons we need or can get. And nuclear energy just becomes an enabler to those ends, right? I think of it as like the space race. We said we're going to go to the moon. We didn't say we're going to go invent Velcro, right? So thinking about what we want to actually go and achieve, and then what are the tools to go and achieve it, nuclear fits well into that. And it becomes a national project. And if it's a national project, it's to be large enough to warrant their interest in it.
Squeeze in one more question.
Again, I don't know if anyone else wants to jump
Yeah.
in on that.
Do any of you have updates to share related to the order book announcement between the U.S. government, Brookfield, Westinghouse, et cetera?
Like the Japan deal? Is that what we're talking about?
I'm not sure. I just read the question that they asked. Yeah.
I'm
Maybe
I have
question or add, if you can add
I
another bit of
I
information.
have no insight
Yeah.
that I'm prepared to talk about.
Um, Victor, you shared a slide about order books as other countries being able to bring down the cost of nuclear more than we have in the US, and Orderbooks playing a role in that. Could you just maybe in the next 30 seconds, could you kind of share why is it that we have not been able to do this in the US, though it's been accomplished in other countries?
Yeah, Jeremy, thank you for the question. I think it all begins with strong federal leadership. So I think that's something that in the United States we're seeking right now in terms of trying to create a cohesive message and strategic framework, both on multiple fronts or on multiple fronts, including regulatory harmonization, down selection of technology, investments into the supply chain and alluding to some of the work that we're doing here at the Nuclear Scaling Initiative, trying to figure out what exactly is the role the federal government can play in terms of providing any type of support for the deployment of new energy projects. I think that's what we've seen in other countries to the point that I didn't include this in the slide, but our neighbors up north, Canada, they're moving forward with American technology, the BRX 300, and albeit they only reached final investment decision for, I believe, one reactor. Steve, feel free to correct me on that, but the plan eventually is to build four on the OPG site, understanding that there's been strong provincial and also federal, excuse me, at country level support for that type of program. So I think that's a part of the reasoning or some of the support that we've seen help different projects achieve the scales of efficiencies that we've seen abroad, and that's what we hope to also replicate here in the United States.
Victor, Sandy, Steve, thank you so much for your time today. All the attendees really appreciate you joining us. We'll be posting a recording of the webinar in the next day or so, and we'll email you that link and the slides. If you have follow-up questions or just want to keep the conversation going, please reach out to any of us directly. And finally, keep an eye out for more webinars coming in 2026, led by CATF State Policy Team. Thanks again for joining today, and we will see you soon.